In the world of kaijus, a man watches his beloved wife die in a nuclear power plant explosion, whose reason was taught to be an earthquake but actually was caused by a kaiju. Today we'll recap Godzilla, a sci-fi movie from 2014. But before we dive in, make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our content. In 1999, a helicopter identified as Monarch flies over a massive excavation in the Philippines. It appears to be an open pit mine. Thousands of people are employed in the massive trenches. A Japanese researcher named Ichiro Serizawa and his British assistant Vivian Graham emerge as the copter touches down. An American supervisor informs them that they have readings indicating a uranium discovery. They brought in heavy equipment only to have it collapse into an underground cavern. They go there in search of the skeletonized carcass of a massive creature that fills the cave as far as the eye can see. A cocoon of some kind appears to be hanging from the cave ceiling, as well as one that appears to have hatched. Going deeper into the cave, it appears that an enormous creature crawled from the cave and tore a wound across the landscape as it made its way towards the sea. Serizawa and Graham are perplexed as to what might have emerged from the cocoon. Joe Brody is on the phone in Japan, concerned about local seismic activity. As a precaution, he believes the power plant should be shut down. He is concerned about ruffling Japanese feathers as an American, but insists on a meeting to express his concerns. His quiet son has made a sign for him. It's his birthday today. Sandy, his wife, rushes their son to school. She reminds Brody that it is his birthday and that his son, Ford, has planned a surprise for him. They drive to the plant, and he instructs his wife to go down into the reactor zone to ensure that nothing has been damaged by the shaking. Brody makes his case at the plant. His superiors believe the activity is simply aftershocks from the recent Philippine earthquakes. Brody, on the other hand, believes the seismic readout on a computer display is unusual and cannot be explained by an earthquake. One of his assistants informs him that the increase in seismic rumblings was measured in hours rather than days. A major tremor strikes the plant. Brody yells, "We need to shut down now." But before the process can begin, another shaker rocks the plant, causing red lights to flash everywhere. Brody's wife is down there because the reactor has been breached. Brody rushes downstairs, demanding that the protective shield door remain in manual override so that he can save his wife. Sandy and her team run full speed ahead of a radioactive cloud rushing through the tunnels, which will kill them despite their protective suits. They're making good time until a teammate trips and Sandy comes to his aid. Meanwhile, Brody has arrived at the door and confirmed his authority. He receives a walkie-talkie message informing him that Sandy has died. Brody is overcome with emotion and physically shakes at the thought of losing her. She tells him that he must close the door in order to save the city. He waits until the last possible moment before closing the door and sealing their fates. Sandy appears with several members of her team literally seconds after the primary door is closed. As the secondary door closes, Brody weeps as he sees his wife being bathed in the toxic radioactive mist. As he is being evacuated from his school, little Ford Brody witnesses the plant's cooling towers collapsing. He is aware that both of his parents work there. All of his classmates flee outside while he watches his entire life crumble. In the present day, an adult LT, Ford Brody is returning home to San Francisco with his wife Elle and their young son Sam after 14 months at sea in the U.S. Navy. The phone rings during a sweet, welcome home scene. Ford learns over the phone that his estranged father, Joe Brody, has been arrested and detained in Japan for trespassing. Ford departs to meet with his father. Ford is clearly disappointed in having to bail out his father in Tokyo. After the accident, Joe had a nervous breakdown, and their relationship is clearly strained. Joe's small flat appears to be a conspiracy theorist's dream. The walls are covered in pictures and articles. There are stacks of books and research all over the place. Clearly, his father has become obsessed with the Henhira accident. Ford suggests that his father accompany him home because he's mumbling about echolocation and earthquakes, talking to each other. Joe hasn't seen his grandson in years and is desperate for some time away. Joe, on the other hand, is adamant about carrying on with his investigation. He needs to know what happened that day. His wife is still buried beneath the rubble of the quarantine zone, and he mentions that he needs to return to his house to retrieve his research, despite the fact that he doesn't even have a photograph of his wife to cherish. Ford reluctantly agrees to assist his father. They return to the old neighborhood, which appears to be abandoned and overrun. A pack of dogs charges through the scene. In a radioactive wasteland, how could that happen? Joe checks his Geiger counter, which indicates that there is no radiation present. He yanks off his protective headgear and takes a deep breath, proving that the air is completely safe. Ford is becoming increasingly convinced that something is wrong here. They search the house, and Joe finds his 3.5-inch zip disks. He comes across a photograph of Sandy and turns to see Ford's birthday sign, which is still strung up after all these years. Meanwhile, Ford discovers an old army toy soldier and steals it. The pounding of helicopter blades jolts them out of their trance. As soon as they step outside, they are apprehended by Japanese-speaking security guards and driven to the abandoned nuclear plant. Serizawa and Graham are conversing with others. They are concerned about activity near an unusual cone-shaped organic structure protruding from the old reactor's surface. Someone interrupts them to inform them that they must must accompany him. They are led to where Joe is being questioned. He comes across as manic and a little loopy, but Graham confirms that his data matches what they're seeing now. He's the only one who remembers what happened 15 years ago, and he wants to see his son and find out what caused his wife's death. Back in the main room, the readings confirm that EMP pulses are frequently knocking out their electronics, exactly like in 1999. Serizawa admits that the program must be terminated. A steel containment net is lowered, and millions of watts of electricity are applied to the chrysalis. The massive jolt of electricity appears to destroy the organic pod, and the light that pulsated within it fades. Suddenly, a massive multi-legged creature bursts through the shell and pounds its clawed leg on the ground, creating an EMP pulse that kills all power in the facility and frees Joe. People are screaming and fleeing as the creature tries to escape. In the meantime, Ford remains handcuffed in a security vehicle. He stands helpless, watching as people are slaughtered around him. Suddenly, a support smashes the detainment vehicle in which he was trapped, releasing him. Joe stands on an elevated walkway, terrified, as his son faces death, but his own safety is jeopardized when the bridge collapses and he tumbles in a terrible fall. Ford puts on a gas mask and looks up just in time to see the creature spread its massive wings and fly away. The following day, Captain Russell Hampton informs Serizawa that the United States military has taken over. He inquires of Serizawa as to who he requires on his team. He motions to Joe, who is bandaged and on a stretcher. Joe and Ford are transported in a military transport. Joe, unfortunately, does not live long. Serizawa and the others turn to Ford, questioning him about his father's findings. Ford is hesitant to comment on his father's obsession, but he recalls something about echolocation. Serizawa hints at this, leads Ford into a briefing room, and informs him that the newly hatched Muto, massive unidentified terrestrial organism, may be attempting to communicate with another giant monster discovered roaming the Pacific a long time ago. Serizawa then shows the same vintage nuclear test footage from 1954 seen in the opening credits, but with a few key details added, primarily a few frames of a familiar giant spiny creature. Serizawa explains that the nuclear tests were not tests at all, but rather attempts to exterminate this creature. This creature was dubbed Godzilla, and Serizawa is convinced he is returning, a belief that is soon confirmed when he is spotted. Godzilla is pursued by the naval fleet. Meanwhile, Elle is terrified by the news coverage of the Japan disaster and is unable to contact Ford. Ford has been placed on a helicopter bound for Hawaii for a flight back home because he doesn't have much to offer. The Navy has confirmed that the Muto is on its way across the Pacific. The fleet moves in that direction, flanked by Godzilla's spines, which are also moving in that direction. According to Serizawa, Godzilla is tracking the Muto and wants to fight it in order to restore nature's balance. Ford is at the airport in Honolulu, waiting for the train to his terminal. He's playing with the toy soldier, and a young Japanese boy becomes enthralled by it. The doors close as the boy wanders onto the train without his parents. They are terrified, but Ford promises to be their boy again. He hopes he doesn't miss his flight. Back on the carrier ship, they've learned that the Russians have gone missing with a nuclear submarine. The Muto consumes radiation, which explains why the nuclear plant was devoid of toxic waste. It could have consumed the sub as a meal. They dispatched a team to investigate in the forest near Honolulu. The team discovers the sub, which is covered in slime and stuck in a tree. Nuclear fuel canisters are being consumed by the Muto. An airborne attack is launched, but the Muto fires its EMP, knocking out all navigation controls and sending the jets crashing to Earth. Power is knocked out at the airport, including power to the airport train. Ford is unaware that the Muto is to blame for the power outage and assures the youngster that it will be restored soon. A young girl at a hotel luau witnesses the plane's explosion in the distant hills. As the little girl notices the seawater receding from the shore at a rapid pace, the crowd becomes concerned. A massive amount of water is being displaced by something. We quickly realize that the creature moving all that water is Godzilla. As the beast reaches the ground, Honolulu is flooded. Power is restored at the airport, but the Muto has reached the elevated tracks, and the train is heading straight into its jaws. The Colossus rips the track, sending passengers to their deaths. Ford barely holds on, grabbing the child as he slides out of the wrecked train. Godzilla fights the Muto, but escapes by flapping its massive wings and continuing its journey to the mainland. Back in San Francisco, Elle is requesting that her son go to bed as he watches the unfolding devastation on the news. The entire world is now aware that the Muto and Godzilla exist. Back on the ship, they're keeping an eye on the Muto's location. It appears to be on its way to San Francisco. Graham and Serizawa realize it must be on its way to the other Muto, long thought to be dead. Unfortunately, the dangerously radioactive body was stored in the midst of an infinite food supply. Nevada's Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Facility. Troops arrive to find the Muto, now confirmed to be a female, has escaped and is on her way to meet her mate. The path passes through Las Vegas. The second Muto is much larger and stronger than the first, and it lumbers through Las Vegas, destroying everything in its path. The Navy has devised a plan to use a nuclear missile. Godzilla will not be far behind. The bomb will then be detonated, killing all 3 monsters. Graham is astounded by the plan's short-sightedness. She and Serizawa believe the plan will fail because the MUTOs eat radiation. According to Captain Hampton, nothing can withstand the power of the newer bombs. Serizawa is skeptical. Meanwhile, Ford boards a Navy transport bound for the mainland after delivering the boy to his parents in devastated Honolulu. The 2 weapons, the bait and the killer bomb, are being transported by train. Ford inserts himself into the story, citing his experience with ordnance. The bombs will be delivered by train to the coast, where the plan will be implemented. Everything appears to be going swimmingly until a tremor stops the train just before a perilous mountain bridge. The team tries to radio ahead, but the screams over the walkie-talkie aren't good. They split into 2 groups, unsure if the bridge even exists. It appears to be fine at first glance, but the female Muto has been lying in wait. It destroys the bridge, consumes one of the nukes, and kills everyone on the train, except Ford, who jumps into the river just as the bridge collapses. By the next morning, a recovery team had located Ford and the nuclear device. They'll fly the remaining bomb and make do with a modified version of the original plant. Serizawa criticizes man's arrogance, thinking we can control nature when it is the other way around. The 2 MUTOs are on their way to their reunion in San Francisco, with Godzilla hot on their tail. The Navy has been tacitly tolerating the monster because it poses no direct threat to the ships, but despite Serizawa's protests, they are determined to destroy them all. Ford has called Elle at the hospital to assure her that he is on his way and requests that she please wait for him. Meanwhile, the entire city is preparing for an evacuation. Elle wants to keep her son with her, but she gives in and entrusts his care to a coworker. As troops in tanks position themselves against the kaiju threat, evacuation buses are stuck on the Golden Gate Bridge. To avoid being disabled by MUTO's EMP, the Navy has rigged the bomb with an analog countdown timer. When a winged Muto attacks, they start the timer. He's looking for a snack for his buddy when he drops the bomb on her. The larger Muto destroys a section of Chinatown to build a nest for their offspring. Godzilla emerges from the depths near the Golden Gate Bridge, sensing his prey. The troops launch an instinctive attack, prompting Godzilla to rip through the bridge. The bus driver sees an opportunity and barrels through barricades to get his passengers to safety. Despite his injuries, Ford claims he can disarm the trigger in about 60 seconds. He's on the team for a high-risk halo jump into San Francisco to retrieve the bomb, defuse it, and make one last attempt to blow the monsters up. They make the jump, losing only a couple of men when Godzilla appears, ready to fight the monsters. Godzilla is holding his own against the smaller, winged male, but when the big female leaves the nest to assist, they band together to attack Godzilla. The troops have discovered the nest and the nuke, but the casing is damaged and they are unable to detonate it there. They start moving it to a boat with more tools and the ability to send it away from the city. The battle between the Titans rages on in the city, with the MUTOs mercilessly jabbing their hooks into Godzilla's massive body. He appears to be defeated, but he continues to fight. Back at the nest, Ford notices thousands of eggs and realizes they pose an even greater danger. He lags behind and pops the covers off spouts from a destroyed tanker truck, flooding the chamber with petrol. Godzilla's battle with the MUTOs appears to be going in Godzilla's favor. He's been mangled by the MUTOs when the nest explodes, destroying all the eggs and sending the female screaming back to the nest in a panic. This is exactly what Godzilla requires. He regains his breath and re-engages with the flying Muto. Muto appears to have an advantage in the air, but Godzilla's long spiked tail knocks the Muto into a building, killing it. Meanwhile, Ford has been caught in the explosion's aftershocks. The female Muto mourns the loss of the babies, but she smells the nuke and returns to get it. When Godzilla reappears and his spinal crest begins to glow blue, the female appears to notice Ford and leans menacingly close to him. The beast unleashes a massive blast of radiation breath on the female Muto, driving it back. He keeps fighting hand to hand. The team arrives at the ship and attempts to make for open water, but the engines are destroyed by an EMP from the female Muto. The troops try valiantly to save the mission, but the beast arrives and begins ripping them apart. Ford goes to the boat to disarm the bomb as the monster turns to attack some troops on shore. The casing has deteriorated beyond repair, and the female Muto sets her sights on his tiny vessel. Suddenly, Godzilla sneaks up behind Mama Muto and grabs her by the throat. He fires an atomic fire blast down her throat, incinerating the beast and ripping her head off. Godzilla eventually succumbs to its injuries and collapses on the beach. Meanwhile, the ship's power comes back on, and Ford instructs the GPS to navigate the ship into the bay. There isn't time to disarm it right now. He collapses to the deck, seemingly content with his fate. As a med-evac helicopter lifts him to safety, a blinking light brings him back to consciousness. The auto-piloted boat erupts into a nuclear explosion in the distance, safely away from the city. In the aftermath, Godzilla's badly injured corpse lies in the streets of San Francisco. Ford hobbles through a hastily converted stadium shelter. He has found his son, but emergency crews are still trying to save people from the hospital that was destroyed destroyed in the kaiju battle, and Elle is still missing. Suddenly, his son notices Elle, and she notices Ford, and they embrace. The family has been reunited, and the threat has been averted. Meanwhile, Serizawa laments the stillness of the great beast's body. It snorts into motion, gradually righting itself and lumbering through the streets towards the water. Serizawa smiles, relieved that this powerful force of nature has survived. The king of the monsters, savior of our city? Godzilla then dives back into the water and swims away into the ocean, according to news reports. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel if you love movies, and don't forget to watch our other videos as well. Till then, see you on the next video.